Why are so many young people enamored with socialism? Hi, Alex McFarland here. We're going to talk about the question that some radio listeners and other people have sent to me. Why are their kids very fixated on socialism? So let's talk about this. Well, for one thing, not all are. But many are. There was a poll that came out last fall, October of 2019, that said for the 2020 elections, something like 70% of 20-somethings say they are likely or extremely likely to vote for a socialist. And while socialism is decreasing among most sectors or belief in socialism, the Victims of Communism Memorial Fund did a pretty vast poll. And among 20-somethings, 50% say they are likely and 20% say extremely likely to vote for a socialist. Here in this capitalistic free market economy, representative republic, why suddenly the fixation with socialism that is pretty much a political and economic ideology thoroughly discredited the world over? While the rest of the world is mitigating away from socialism, why would it be gaining ground here in America? Let's talk about that, because I think there are basically three things we can point to, and maybe a fourth. And it would be education, culture, and age. Then I'll give a fourth at the end. Education. For one thing, public education for decades now has really been very secularized, and I would say at best neutral on America, but very often anti-American. Hey, I'm a product of public education, and I've spoken in hundreds of schools and colleges, and I've talked with teachers, and I know my mom, who taught herself for 28 years in the public school. My mom went back at age 50 to get her master's degree, and she was in the public education for 28 years, and she was always agonizing how the teachers' unions were so left-leaning. And so many young people that are now young adults, 20-somethings, they came up K through 12 in public university that promoted socialist ideas and promoted this idea that if somebody has, then of necessity, somebody else has not, and that free market capitalism is inherently selfish and inherently causes some people to suffer. So the rise of socialism is an outflow of the educational mindset that many have set under. But let me talk about culture for a moment, because I would say many of the 20-somethings that now are reaching their career goals, they've got an education, and they're becoming, a big part of the economy and the electorate, they've never seen America at her best. I well remember the 70s, the bicentennial era, and even though it was the time of the gas crunch and the recession of the 70s and the melees of the Carter years, there was a lot of national pride. And oh my goodness, as we had America's 200th anniversary in 1976, it was almost like that was the last era of very tangible national pride. Now, food stamps came along, but I remember listening to people in the grocery store line indignantly saying they wouldn't use food stamps. They wanted a job because the government was not their nanny and things like that. Do you know there's been this cultural shift away from love of America and patriotism? And even Thomas Jefferson, in his own lifetime, in the early 19th century, Jefferson said he feared that younger generations would come along that didn't have the spirit and the values of 76. And by that he meant 1776, the rugged individualism of fending for oneself here in America. So there's been a great cultural shift. But I want to talk about age. Now, please listen very carefully. And in a way, some of this is a little bit of a generalization, but I think there is some applicable truths here. Jean Piaget was the Swiss psychologist. He lived 1896 to 1980. And he talked about the stages of intellectual and moral development and the ability for concrete thought, from an infant just touching things, sensory motor, to a toddler and a child learning vocabulary, pre-operational. Then we're in that age of concrete operational, late childhood, where everything is black and white. Everything is very concrete. But by adolescence, Piaget says that we move into formal operational, the capacity for abstract thought. And we understand that there is in life things that don't necessarily follow and things that do necessarily follow. Now, I would submit to you that a lot of the 20-somethings, and I know I've dialogued with hundreds, and they think, well, if a business has profit, that necessarily came at the expense of somebody else. It's a very concrete black and white mindset with an inability to understand that poverty is not necessarily the cause of some big, bad, greedy corporation. There are things like personal responsibility, there are moral decisions that we all make, and economic outcomes are the caused by a vast number of mitigating factors. And what I think has been the gravitation towards socialism on the part of a lot of young adults is that part of their emotional, cognitive, and moral psychological development has been stilted and hindered even by painful things in their childhood, the breakdown of the family, the fact that nearly 50% of kids born over the last 30 years will never live under the same roof with their biological mother and father. All of these things play into our ability or our inability to see things in abstract and factually accurate ways. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. The idea that capitalism is necessarily evil, greedy, and exploitive of people doesn't necessarily follow at all. And sometimes I think that the people who cry out the government owes people a living, and if you have, conversely, somebody else has not. I suspect that a lot of those same voices that call out for redistribution of wealth and economic equity are some of the same voices that we probably heard on the playground always crying out, "That's not fair, it's not fair," when the other side got a run in a game of kickball. Now finally, the last reason I would say that there's been a rise of socialism is it's almost like a fad. I mean, fads can come and go, but fads can be dangerous. And in recent years, socialism has had some high-profile, trendy spokespersons like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now, you don't often hear the name Bernie Sanders and the word trendy in the same sentence, do you? But hey, they've gotten a lot of press and a lot of very positive press. So finally, what I would say is that the rise of socialism is something we need to know about, and these are my thoughts on it. You can agree or disagree, and I would encourage you, let me hear from you. Like us on social media, reach out to us, let me hear what your thoughts are. But I would say this, the way that ideas are discussed, understood, promoted, is by what I would call life-on-life transference or relationships. Get in the habit of talking to people. If you love God and country, that's great. But make friends with people even with whom you disagree. And let's talk about these things. But I believe the greatest engine for not only personal empowerment, the creation of wealth, feeding families, and putting money in people's pockets, the greatest engine for that has been free market capitalism. It's going to take work, hard work, seizing opportunity, putting your own time and wealth at risk. But the answer is not to go towards socialism or communism. The answer is to have a moral, constitutional America where we all work hard and we look out for ourselves by helping our neighbors, yes, but we don't need the government to control us. We need the Constitution to free us. This is my thoughts on this subject. Thanks for listening, and I hope to hear from you on this. I welcome your response. God bless you. Have a great day.